Hello everybody, my name is Jose Balbuena, and this is Resistance by the Young. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the organizations in Germany once Hitler came to power, and in response to that, we're also going to be talking about the resistance group that were created once Hitler did come into power, and we will go into some detail regarding Herbert Baum, Gertrude Koch, and Uschi Littmann. Once Hitler came into power back in 1933, he only allowed two organizations to stay intact, one of them being the Hitler Youth and the other being the League of German Girls. Any other group that was not these two were no longer allowed to come together. They were banned and they were disbanded, and refusal to do so obviously resulted in persecution. These two youth groups that Hitler allowed required absolute obedience and absolute loyalty to Hitler. The boys of the Hitler Youth received pre-military training in the final goal, which was to create the perfect soldier. On the other hand of that, the girls were pretty much molded into being the perfect housewife, the perfect mother, and the perfect wife, and obviously ultimately they were shaped to be able to breed the perfect Aryan race. But obviously not all young people were, willing to accept this kind of requirement of full and absolute obedience. Political youth groups attempted to stay together illegally, or they managed to regroup somehow, but unfortunately for them, the Gestapo ruthlessly persecuted their attempts. Young people had many different motives for their resistance, and they came together as communists, social democrats, Christians, and obviously Jewish. In these groups, they listened to banned foreign radio stations, they passed on the news, or they tried their best to inform people of the course of the war and obviously the war crimes that were going on underneath everybody's noses. Obviously, they all risked death sentences from participating in such actions. Herbert Baum, he is at the center of all these resistance groups, and he's very important because from his resistance group, many came to be, but he was the main one, as in he started the majority of these, and he knew the leaders of all these other different resistance groups. A little background information on him: obviously he was born back in 1912, and unfortunately he died in 1942. He was the son of an accountant, and he lived the majority of his youth in Berlin, and he became an electrician in 1928. He did seek higher education. His main goal was to become an electrical engineer, but he was banned from attending further classes in 1935. Mind you, this was after Hitler came to power, so he managed to make it through for just a little bit. In response to that, obviously, he would come to join the Communist Youth Federation, which honestly, their biggest goal was pretty much just to oppose the Nazi state. He was in touch with other communists, such as his friend Robert Uhrig, who in the end created even more resistance groups. Baum's resistance group had to rely entirely on itself. They had no money, they had no support other than themselves, and sometimes they would resort to stealing, and sometimes they would steal from their own. Unfortunately for him, he was arrested in a failed attempt at an attack on a anti-Soviet exhibition. Once arrested, he was mistreated, abused, tortured, whatnot, and sadly he committed suicide on June 11th of 1942. Next it would be Gertrude Koch. She was born in Cologne, and she was a daughter of a boilermaker and an apothecary. Unfortunately for her and her family, her father was a known communist, so when Hitler came to power in 1933, he was quickly apprehended, sent to a labor camp, and then sent to a concentration camp where he would be executed. Like I mentioned, the family did suffer because of her father, and her mother lost her job, and both of them had to leave their home. Obviously, money was tight, so Gertrude could not attend school, but in doing so, she managed to join she was a member of the Red Young Pioneers, and in doing so, she also landed an apprenticeship to become a kindergarten teacher. But unfortunately for her, due to the Nazi state deeming her as politically unreliable, she was not allowed to finish that. And the group that she was part of, obviously, they started a hiking group and a group that played music, which in the end became very, very politically active. And they, in the end, started to distribute flyers, obviously with anti-Nazi propaganda. The biggest one was when they decided to throw a massive amount of flyers from the dome of a Cologne Main Station, which was a transport station. Following this incident, a number of arrests obviously happened, and in December of 1942, Gertrude was taken to a Gestapo prison where she was beaten and mistreated. Come May of 1943, she was released from said prison. They never gave her an actual reason why, but she did not hesitate to flee Germany with her mother. They ended up working on a farm until the end of the war. They eventually did return to Cologne, and she was able to publicly tell her story in 2000. Mind you, that was a very long time after the end of the war. And obviously she died in 2016, so she was one of the very few who was able to live through Nazi Germany's mistreatment of obviously the communist group. Next we have Uschi Littman. She obviously was she came from a Jewish family, and she was part of a youth group that was associated with anti-Nazi sentiment, obviously. She was denied from continuing going to school because of her Jewish origin. And unfortunately for her, she obviously joined a resistance group that would later start small little, not riots, but they would start posting what was a sticky note back then. I would assume sticky notes with anti-Nazi resistance, trying to help out whatever way they could, leaving positive little notes here and there. And obviously they were being not looked out for, but they were pretty much being investigated, and they were trying to get a hold of all of them, obviously, to incarcerate them and whatnot. The night of the November pogrom, she was working at a hat making shop. In doing so, the owner of the shop came into the room that she was at and pretty much told her to go downstairs in the basement, where from there she heard everything. She heard the destruction, the beatings, the torture, everything that you could possibly imagine. In doing so, after this, her family decided to leave, and with the help of a friend, they were able to illegally cross into Amsterdam and then later into the Netherlands, where she joined a socialist group that took care of refugees. And there she met her husband, Max Rubenstein, and within the group, and obviously he was a Jew. Eventually, like I said, they got married, and they went into hiding after the German invasion. There she was able to perform courier services, obviously in secret, and managed to live throughout the war, pretty much unscathed and unnoticed. And she would, like I said, she managed to make it through and would later die on August 25th of 2016.